When I turned 72, I didn't ask for a party. I didn't want cake or candles or fuss. I just wanted peace. Quiet evenings, crossword puzzles, and my morning walks by the lake. But my daughter Lena had other ideas. She called one morning, voice sweet like honey warmed just right, and said she missed me. "Mom," she said, "the kids don't get to see you enough. You're always 2 towns away. Why don't you just come live with us for a while? Darren thinks it's a great idea." Her husband Darren always played polite in public, but carried a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Still, the offer sounded like love. I didn't have many close friends left, and Lena had always known how to tug the right strings, so I said yes. A week later, I packed up my 1-bedroom condo in Havenfield and moved into their larger, newer home on a quiet street in Oak Ridge, Oregon. The house had wraparound porches, a swing out front, and fresh hydrangeas by the mailbox. Lena had even painted the guest room in pale lavender with ivory trim. My favorite colors since childhood. There was a photo of us from her high school graduation on the dresser, and a little note that said, "So happy you're here." I remember standing in that room, suitcase still in hand, heart heavy with cautious hope. Maybe this would bring us closer again. Maybe this would mend what time and distance had strained. Back in Havenfield, I had my routines, my ceramic owl salt shakers, the same kettle I'd used since I had worked part-time at the Historical Society, archiving local war letters and hosting genealogy workshops. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me purpose. Lena said she wanted her children to hear my stories. She said they needed more family in their lives, and I believed her. The first few days went well, too well maybe. Lena brewed me chamomile tea every evening, just the way I liked it, with a hint of honey and a splash of lemon. Darren asked about my old job, even feigned interest in the history lectures I used to give at the community center. The kids, Eli and Morgan, sat cross-legged at my feet while I told them how their great-great-grandfather crossed the prairie in a wagon with little more than a Bible and a broken compass. I started to think I'd made the right choice, that maybe, just maybe, this was home again. But comfort, I've learned, can be a trap when it arrives too quickly. By the start of the second week, I noticed little changes. The way Lena brought up money more often, casually slipping it into conversations like background noise. She talked about how tight things had gotten lately, tuition costs, mortgage rates, medical bills. I listened quietly, nodding, not offering. Darren dropped hints too. One night over dinner, while slicing into a roast, he said a client had introduced him to a real opportunity, some kind of real estate fund with massive upside and zero risk. I smiled politely, but inside something clenched. I had heard that tone before, years ago, when a friend of mine lost her retirement to a slick-talking nephew. 3 days later, Lena came into my room holding a bright red folder. She sat down beside me, laid it across my lap like she was offering a family recipe. Inside were bank transfer forms, notarization pages, a printed summary of my investment account, one I hadn't shown anyone in years. "I just thought we'd get a head start," she said lightly. "It's not permanent, Mom, just a temporary shift, 6 months max. We'll return every penny." I blinked. "How did you get this?" I asked, tapping the document with my finger. Her smile faltered for just a second. "Oh, I've always had your passwords. You gave them to me years ago, remember? I just check in now and then, you know, to make sure everything's okay." My stomach sank. I hadn't given her those passwords. Least, not knowingly. Maybe she'd guessed them. Maybe she'd watched me type them when I wasn't looking. Either way, she'd crossed a line I didn't know we'd even drawn. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared up at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me, and thought about my late husband Charles, how we'd built everything we had penny by penny, how we never touched the principal. I thought about the time I loaned Lena $2,000 to fix her car's transmission. She never paid it back. I realized then that I wasn't in a home. I was in a transaction, and I was the asset. By the end of that week, I started locking my door at night, just quietly, gently, like slipping into a habit. I didn't say anything to Lena. I didn't confront Darren, but something had shifted inside me. Not fear, not yet, just a tightening, a quiet awareness that love in some homes came with invoices instead of embraces, and I knew then I had to pay attention, because this wasn't the end of the manipulation, it was only the beginning. I woke early the next morning before the sun had stretched itself over Oak Ridge. The house was still and cold, filled only with the low hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the floorboards settling. I tiptoed to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat by the window, watching the porch sway slightly in the wind. The lavender paint on the guest room door still looked fresh, but now it felt like a lie. Later that day, I found a grocery receipt on the kitchen counter folded neatly, with a sticky note attached. Your share $42.07. Thanks. No greeting, no warmth, just ink and numbers, and a plastic smile on paper. The red pen had even circled items. Milk, cereal, chamomile tea. Things I had used, yes, but things I had always offered to pay for. I stared at it for a long moment before placing it quietly in the drawer. That evening, Lena handed me a printed spreadsheet, an itemized list of utility expenses, color-coded and broken down by room usage, number of showers and appliance time. This way, she said, her tone breezy, everything stays fair. Transparency keeps family strong. Darren, sitting across the room scrolling through his phone, nodded without looking up. I didn't argue. I just walked upstairs with the paper in hand and sat on the edge of my bed. The numbers weren't outrageous, but the message was louder than any dollar sign. I wasn't a mother in their home. I was a tenant. 2 days later, I found Darren flipping through a small black notebook at the kitchen island. When I stepped in, he snapped it shut too quickly. He offered a grin that showed too many teeth and said something about baseball scores, but I knew that look. It was the same grin he wore when he forgot to split the check on family dinners. Later that night, while they were out, I checked the drawer where I kept my financial documents, just to be sure. The folder was slightly off-center, tabs shifted, pages shuffled. Someone had been searching, quietly, deliberately. The next morning, over a breakfast I didn't have the appetite to eat, Lena brought up estate planning. You ever think about simplifying things? She asked, cutting into a boiled egg. Like for emergency, joint accounts make things easier. And my friend Jenna's mom put everything in a trust for her kids. Super smooth transition. I didn't respond. Darren chimed in, still in his robe. I've got all the paperwork templates. Been helping clients with this stuff for years. Takes no time. I stared at my cereal. The milk had gone warm. The spoon felt like a weight in my hand. That afternoon I took a drive, said I was going to the craft store. Instead, I parked in the lot behind a credit union and called my financial advisor from the front seat. Lock everything down, I told him. Transfers, edits, shared access. Freeze anything you don't recognize and notify me instantly. He paused. Is something wrong, Mrs. Holloway? I forced a smile into my voice. Just a precaution, for peace of mind. By the weekend, Lena handed me a fresh packet of forms in a bright blue folder. Nothing binding, she said, just a draft to get the ball rolling. I didn't open it. I placed it on my nightstand and asked how Eli was doing in school. She didn't press, not that day. But 2 mornings later, I was in the garage, looking for a small toolbox when Darren cornered me near the shelves. He leaned casually against the doorframe, holding his travel mug like it was a weapon made of ceramic and steam. Lena's just trying to help, you know. You're lucky to have a daughter who cares this much. Then he paused, grinned, and added, money only causes drama when folks get secretive. I walked past him without a word, locked my bedroom door behind me and sat on the bed, listening to the walls breathe. That night I stayed up, changed every password I could remember, called a friend from the library archives, who still worked IT support and had helped me set up digital backups years ago. I asked him how to create an encrypted folder. Keeping secrets, Margie? No, I said, pressing the phone to my cheek, just making sure mine don't get stolen. I copied every legal document I owned onto a flash drive, hid it inside the lining of my suitcase, under the cloth flap behind the zip, wrote down emergency numbers and kept them in a second notebook beneath the bottom drawer of the nightstand. I wasn't afraid, not yet. But I was getting ready, because the quiet betrayal of people who know you best doesn't scream, it whispers and it plans, and I could feel their plan tightening around me. By the start of the third week, the warmth that had once filled the house began to thin. It wasn't sudden. It was slow and strange, like the air itself had changed temperature, while no one was watching. I noticed it in the way Darren's footsteps grew heavier on the stairs, in the way Lena stopped knocking before entering my room, in the silences that stretched too long at dinner, even with the children present. Morgan, once eager to braid my hair or beg for bedtime stories, had become distant. Eli rarely made eye contact. I told myself it was school stress or hormones, but deep down I knew better. Kids sense tension long before adults acknowledge it. The house began to feel like a stage, one where I had become an unwanted prop. The first truly alarming moment came on a rainy Wednesday morning. I reached under the bed for my pill organizer, just like I always did, but it wasn't there. I found it instead sitting on top of the dresser, open, with Monday and Tuesday's slots emptied, even though I hadn't taken a thing. I stared at it for a long while. No confrontation, no panic, just a slow, cold calculation. I threw out the pills, started a new set from my travel supply. From that moment on, I kept everything important zipped inside a fabric pouch that never left my side. My medication, my ID, my phone, and a small amount of cash tucked inside the sleeve of an old checkbook. And I stopped leaving my coffee unattended. That same afternoon, I heard Darren talking on the phone in the backyard. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but his voice was sharp, louder than usual. He was pacing near the tool shed, gesturing wildly with his free hand. I couldn't catch everything, but I heard enough. Her name's already on the house. All we need is the signature, legal guardianship. I moved back from the window. Later that day, Lena walked into my room with a manila envelope in her hands. She smiled. It was the same smile she wore the day she got her driver's license. Nervous, proud, hiding something. "Would you mind signing a few papers for me, Mom? It's just for the refinance routine updates." I didn't answer right away. I took the envelope, opened it slowly. On page 3, I saw it. My name listed under a secondary mortgage. Not just as an emergency contact, as a co-owner. I looked up. "Lena, why is my name here?" She blinked. "That must be a clerical error. I'll talk to Darren." She left the room quickly. That night, I waited until everyone was asleep. Then I pulled my suitcase from the closet, opened the secret flap inside, and pulled out the documents I had copied weeks earlier. Charles's old investment statements, my notarized trust documents, my power of attorney limitations. I reviewed everything by lamplight. Lena and Darren thought I had nothing more than my small retirement account and the condo I sold before moving in, but they didn't know I had kept separate accounts all these years. My name had never been on their house. I had diversified what Charles left me, some in mutual funds, some in a secure offshore account. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't helpless. The next morning, I drove to the bank, quietly. No explanation, no discussion. I asked to speak with the branch manager, and provided every piece of ID I had. I requested a full access log for all attempts made on any account tied to my social security number. She didn't blink, just printed the log, handed it over. 2 failed logging attempts had been made within the past 10 days, both from an IP address belonging to Darren's office network. I looked at her. "Can we restrict all access to in-person, biometric and voice verified only?" She nodded and said, "Of course," immediately. I walked out into the Oregon rain, not bothering to use my umbrella. The sky had finally cracked open above me, and it felt oddly fitting. When I returned home, dinner was already set. Roast pork again, carrots too soft, the scent of rosemary, heavy and unwelcoming. Darren asked me how my day was. "I went to the park," I said. He nodded, satisfied. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat up reading the same paragraph of a book over and over, without ever turning the page, not because I was afraid, but because I could feel the weight of the moment before collapse. 3 days later I woke to find my bedroom ransacked. My drawers pulled open, my suitcase unzipped, the lining of my coat sliced at the seam, and my flash drive, the one holding every financial record, trust document and account backup, was gone. I stood at the doorway, heart pounding, breath shallow. Then I turned, walked downstairs, and found Lena in the kitchen stirring oatmeal. She didn't look up. Darren stood by the fridge, arms crossed. "Did someone go through my room?" I asked. Lena shrugged. "Maybe one of the kids was looking for scissors," Darren added. "Or maybe you misplaced something. Too fast, too smooth." I didn't reply. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just went back upstairs, closed the door, and reached behind the bookshelf for the old burner phone Charles and I had kept for emergencies. Something we used once during a real estate scam 20 years ago. Something I never thought I'd need again. I dialed a number I hadn't used in over a decade. My attorney answered on the second ring. When he heard my voice, he paused. I gave him the code word we had agreed on long ago. "Mulberry." His tone changed instantly. "I need you to trigger the fail-safe," I said. Today." He didn't ask questions, just said, "Give me 20 minutes." And for the first time in weeks, I felt like the walls of that house weren't closing in anymore. They were about to collapse outward, but this time, in my direction. 20 minutes turned into 40. Then, an hour. I stayed in my room with the door locked, pacing slowly across the floorboards like I had done so many nights before. Only this time I wasn't planning how to protect myself. I was planning how to reclaim what had always been mine. When my phone finally buzzed, it was a secure line. My attorney, Victor Ames, had done everything we agreed to and more. "The trust is locked," he said. "All power of attorney privileges have been revoked. Your offshore custodian has been notified of suspected fraud. Any transfers or account changes now require your biometric signature, in person, with 2 forms of ID and video confirmation. We also filed a preliminary report with Adult Protective Services just to start a paper trail." He paused. "You're safe, Margaret. Legally, but we still need to get you out of there." I had already packed a small overnight bag, just the essentials. My pouch of documents, a change of clothes, my late husband's watch, and the old paperback novel I had been pretending to read for the past 2 weeks. I didn't cry. I didn't stall. I acted. That evening I came down the stairs like I had every night before. Darren was by the fireplace, drink in hand. Lena stood behind him, arms crossed, face unreadable. On the coffee table between them was the flash drive. My flash drive set out like a trophy. They didn't speak, and neither did I. "I'm going for a walk," I said simply, wrapping my coat around my shoulders. They didn't stop me. At the end of the block, a black sedan waited with its engine running. The driver stepped out and opened the door. "Miss Holloway?" I nodded and climbed in. We drove in silence to a safe house I hadn't visited in years, a small craftsman-style cottage just out Springfield, deeded to an old friend of mine who owed me a favor. No one knew about it, not even Lena. That was the point. That night I slept, not deeply, but without fear. The silence was different in the cottage. It didn't stretch or echo like it had in their house. It was warm, contained, honest. The next morning, Victor met me with a stack of documents. We froze every joint asset, flagged every phone number and device associated with Darren's office, and we moved everything, every fund, every deed, every document, into an irrevocable trust under my name alone. "Here," he said, sliding over a page. "This is your legacy. No one touches it now, not without your voice, your breath, and your signature." For the first time in weeks I exhaled without feeling watched. I stayed in the safe house for 3 days. I didn't turn on the news, didn't scroll. I just sat with myself. And in those still hours I realized something. This wasn't just about stolen money. It wasn't even about betrayal. It was about erasure. Lena and Darren hadn't tried to take my wealth. They had tried to remove me from the center of my own life, to turn me into a bystander, to make my silence permanent. On the 4th morning, I received an email from the bank. Another login attempt had been flagged. using outdated credentials. The request had come from Darren's company IP again. The same day, Victor got confirmation from our trust administrator. Everything had officially transferred. The legal structure was sealed, untouchable. 2 successor trustees I had chosen years ago, retired women I'd met through the Historical Society, were now authorized to act only if I became incapacitated. That wasn't going to happen. Not now. Not on their timeline. I called Adult Protective Services directly. A lead investigator answered. I told her everything. The receipts, the surveillance, the silent pattern of manipulation that began with fake smiles and ended in fraud attempts. I'm not pressing charges yet, I said, but I want it on record. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You did the right thing, ma'am. Most don't speak up until it's too late." That evening, I drove back to the city, not to Lena's house but to Patrice's. She opened the door before I knocked. "Margie," she said, eyes wide, arms open. No questions, no judgment, just warmth and a spare room already made up. Over dinner I finally let the weight settle, not just from what they did, but from the years I spent telling myself I was imagining it, that the odd feeling, the strange glance, the misplaced document were just the result of getting older. But I wasn't confused. I was right, and that truth became my anchor. 3 days later a letter arrived, from a law firm, representing Lena and Darren. It didn't call me Mum. It didn't acknowledge what had happened. It expressed concern about your recent absence and requested a voluntary meeting to revisit your estate structure. It suggested I was being influenced by external parties and suffering from cognitive decline. It accused me of not acting in my own best interest. I handed the letter to Victor. He read it, set it down, and smiled like someone who had been waiting for this moment all along. "Let's write them back," he said, and I could already feel it coming. The turn, the moment when everything they thought was buried, would rise to the surface, not as vengeance, but as truth, with teeth. The response we drafted was sharp, but measured. Victor never raised his voice on paper. He didn't have to. His precision was its own kind of weapon. He attached my latest medical evaluations, cognitive assessments performed during a recent physical. He included sworn statements from my financial advisor, my former co-worker at the library, Patrice, and 2 members of the Oak Ridge Women's Historical Committee I'd served on for nearly a decade. Each one confirmed that I was not only capable, but organized, lucid, and responsible. He also attached a copy of my trust documents, sealed, legal, and time-stamped, along with a detailed log showing the attempted breaches of my accounts, each attempt traced back to either Darren's company IP address or Lena's tablet. Finally, he added the letter I had written longhand just 2 days before. It wasn't legal jargon, it was personal. "I am not confused," I had written. "I am not manipulated. I am not afraid. What I am is finished being taken advantage of." We submitted the response to the probate court and waited. 3 weeks passed. During that time, I tried to return to a normal routine. Morning tea, walks with Patrice through her quiet neighborhood, watering the flowers that lined her back porch. But every time I let my guard down, something reminded me that my story hadn't yet settled, that the storm, though weakened, hadn't fully passed. One afternoon, Patrice brought in the mail and handed me a formal envelope, a court summons. Lena and Darren had filed a petition requesting guardianship and control over my estate. They claimed I was mentally compromised and being isolated by unknown individuals for financial exploitation. They cited incidents pulled from thin air, confusion at a family gathering, alleged memory lapses, even claims I'd misplaced medication. I stared at the paper for a long time, not angry, not even surprised, just tired. They were trying to erase me, one document at a time. Victor didn't flinch. "We'll contest it," he said, "in court, on the record. And we won't just defend you, we'll expose them." The hearing was set for a Tuesday morning in early spring. I spent the weekend preparing, not with scripts or speeches, but in silence, remembering, finding my center. On the day of the hearing, I wore the navy suit Charles had once said made me look unshakable. I pinned my hair back, carried a single folder in my hands, and walked into that courthouse with my back straight and my breath calm. Lena and Darren sat on the other side of the courtroom, avoiding eye contact. Their attorney was young, too eager. He spoke first, painting me as increasingly unstable, vulnerable to manipulation, and unwilling to engage with close family who had her best interests at heart. He called two witnesses, mutual friends of Darren and Lena, people I barely remembered meeting. They testified about vague concerns, third-hand stories, and something they heard at a barbecue. Then Victor stood. He began with facts: the attempted account breaches, the forged refinance forms, the power of attorney attempt, and the flash drive theft. He presented timestamps, expert statements, IP logs, and voice print data from the bank. Then he placed my handwritten letter in front of the judge. She read it slowly, silently. When she looked up, she didn't ask questions. She simply said, "This is one of the clearest cases of attempted financial coercion I've seen in years." She dismissed the petition immediately and referred the matter to the Financial Crimes Unit for review. Darren and Lena didn't speak as we left. They didn't need to. The silence clung to them like smoke, something you could smell long after it disappeared. Back at Patrice's that evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and let the moment settle. The court had ruled in my favor, but that wasn't the real victory. The real win was this: I had reclaimed my voice, not with anger, not with revenge, but with truth. And truth, when spoken calmly and clearly, is louder than any scream. The day after the hearing, I woke with a strange stillness in my chest. Not relief exactly, but something adjacent. Something quiet and heavy, like a room where furniture has just been moved out. I had won. The court had dismissed their petition. The judge had seen through the lies, but that didn't fill the empty space they left behind. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. Instead, I brewed a stronger cup of coffee than usual and sat on Patrice's back porch, wrapped in a faded quilt she had owned since college. The air was cold but not bitter, and for the first time in weeks I felt like I was breathing without bracing. Later that day, Victor stopped by with an update. "They've gone quiet," he said, referring to Lena and Darren, "but the Financial Crimes Unit has opened an investigation. Based on the evidence from the hearing, they're taking it seriously." I nodded, folding my hands in my lap. "Good," I said. "Not for me, but for others like me." Victor tilted his head. "What do you mean?" I took a breath. "I don't want this to end with just a ruling. I want it to mean something." He smiled softly. "Then I think you know what to do next." That night I reopened an old file I hadn't looked at in over a decade. One Charles and I created long ago when we first drafted our charitable fund. Back then, it had a simple name: the Holloway Family Education Grant. We used it to help underprivileged high school students in Heavenfield with college applications and book costs. But now, it needed a new name, a new purpose. I renamed it the Elladine Trust, after my grandmother, a woman who raised 6 children during the Great Depression and still managed to give her neighbors sugar during rationing seasons. A woman who never took more than she needed but always made sure no one left her kitchen hungry. The new trust had one focus: providing grants and emergency financial relief to women over 65 who had been financially exploited by family. I set it up with automatic disbursement each fiscal quarter. I didn't need recognition. I didn't even plan on attaching my name publicly, until something happened that changed my mind. The local news outlet picked up the court ruling. The headline was respectful: "Elderly woman wins guardianship case, exposes financial manipulation." They didn't name me, but the details were close enough for those in Oak Ridge to figure it out. Within a week, my mailbox filled with letters. Some were from strangers. Others were from women I knew only in passing. Neighbors, church acquaintances, people I used to see at the grocery store. Their stories all had a similar ache. Sons who borrowed and never repaid. Daughters who quietly drained retirement accounts. In-laws who handled the bills until nothing was left. And every one of those women ended their letters the same way. I thought I was the only one. I was. None of us were. Patrice and I sat at her dining room table the following Sunday, reading through the stack. Her eyes welled up more than once. Mine stayed dry, but my heart ached. "These women are invisible," she whispered, "and no one's listening." "They are now," I said quietly. That night I made one more decision. I contacted the local women's center and asked if they'd be willing to host a small gathering. Nothing formal, no podiums or banners, just a conversation. They agreed. The following Wednesday, 12 women showed up. We sat in folding chairs in a circle, holding paper cups of coffee and warm muffins from a local bakery. I didn't start with my story. I let them speak first, and they did slowly, quietly, but with growing strength. I heard about daughters who forged signatures, sons-in-law who bullied their way into joint accounts, sisters who manipulated power of attorney rights, and through it all, I just listened. When it was finally my turn, I said only this: "They tried to erase me, but I wrote my name back in, letter by letter, quietly, fully." There was no applause, no gasps, just stillness. But it wasn't the suffocating kind. It was the kind that holds space. That night I got a call from the Women's Center director. She asked if I would be willing to speak again, this time for a recorded session to share with other centers across the state. I said yes, not because I wanted to be seen, but because I finally understood what real survival looked like. It didn't scream. It didn't demand revenge. The recording session at the Women's Center was simple. No lights, no stage, no production team. Just a folding chair, a gray backdrop, and an older woman in a soft blue blouse holding her own hands in her lap, me. A young intern named Rosie set up the camera. She looked nervous, maybe unsure how to speak to someone my age. But when I smiled, she relaxed. "Whenever you're ready," she said softly. I took a breath, let it settle, and began. I didn't read from a script. I didn't rehearse. I just spoke. I talked about the small betrayals, the ones that build slowly like dust on a windowsill, until the view is gone entirely. I told them about the passwords Lena had stolen, the way Darren had cornered me in the garage, the morning I found my pills rearranged. I told them how I knew something was wrong, even when the world kept telling me to be grateful, be quiet, be cooperative. Then I said something I hadn't planned. I am not a victim. I am a witness, not just to what was done to me, but to what I did in response. After we finished, Rosie walked up with tears in her eyes. She asked if she could hug me. I nodded, and when she embraced me, it wasn't the soft, fragile kind people give their grandmothers. It was strong, fierce, respectful. That night, Patrice made a lemon chicken casserole and insisted we eat on the back patio under the string lights. The spring air smelled of wet grass and lilac, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something that went deeper than safety. I felt whole. The following morning, Victor called. His tone was urgent but calm. "The investigation is moving faster than expected," he said. "The Financial Crimes Unit has connected Darren's login attempts to a larger pattern. He's under review for similar behavior in 2 other cases, former clients who claim he manipulated access to their estates." I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the sunlight stretching across the tile. I shouldn't have been surprised. Men like Darren don't start with their own family. They practice first, quietly, cleanly, on those too overwhelmed to fight back. Then Victor added, "They're preparing to bring federal charges." I didn't speak, not right away. I just nodded, even though he couldn't see it. Something heavy and final shifted in my chest. "And Lena?" I asked. There was a pause. "She's not named in the formal charges yet, but she's tied to the trust paperwork. It's possible she could be implicated. That depends on how much she knew and when." I hung up and stared at the framed photo of Charles on the wall across the room. He was younger in that picture, holding our daughter when she was no more than 6 months old. I remembered the day vividly, how she had wrapped her tiny fingers around his thumb and refused to let go. Later that evening, while I was tending to the potted basil on Patrice's patio, an email arrived. It was from an address I didn't recognize, but I knew the writing instantly. It was from Lena. She had seen the recording. A friend had forwarded it. She didn't say much, just that she'd watched it twice and that she didn't realize how deep it had gone. No apology, no explanation, just a line at the end. I hope you find peace in whatever comes next. I didn't reply, not because I was angry. I wasn't, not anymore. I simply had nothing to add, because she was right. I had already found it. That night I walked the length of Patrice's garden barefoot. The grass was cool and the earth felt steady under my feet. I thought about the legacy I was leaving, not in money, not even in the trust, but in something far less tangible. A woman who had once been dragged out of her daughter's house was now being listened to by hundreds of others. Her voice, once dismissed, now echoed in the halls of justice and in the hearts of women who'd almost given up. And Spring melted into early summer, and with it came a stillness that wasn't silence. It was clarity. Patrice called it the deep breath between chapters. I called it survival. 3 weeks after my video at the Women's Center aired, the Then Trust received over 200 inquiries. Not all were eligible, but almost every single one carried a story that mirrored mine in fragments. A sister's manipulation, a brother's entitlement, a daughter's cold control masked as concern. Each line written carried the same underlying question. Am I wrong for feeling betrayed? I read every single one. Victor kept me updated on the case. Darren had retained a defense attorney, someone known more for optics than outcomes. The charges were formal now: attempted wire fraud, financial coercion of an elder, and unauthorized use of personal information. His company had been quietly dissolved. 2 other women had stepped forward, former clients of his, both widows. One had even recorded a phone call. Lena hadn't been charged. Yet, that was harder to process than I expected. On paper, she had participated in nearly every step: the trust preparation, the subtle gaslighting, the digital invasion of my finances. But in legal terms, there was still room for ambiguity. She hadn't signed the fake forms. Darren had. She hadn't tried to log into my accounts. He had. But she had stood beside him. And sometimes, silence is as sharp as a signature. Then came the moment I didn't see coming. It was a Thursday morning when I opened the mailbox and found a cream envelope. No stamp, no return address, just my name in handwriting I had once known better than my own. Inside was a photograph. Lena, maybe 18, sitting on my lap at the county fair, her arms around my neck, her eyes wide, my face half turned, smiling at something off camera. The edges were worn, the color faded, but it was us, from a time before things frayed. Folded inside the photo was a handwritten note, only 4 words. I remember this too. That night I placed the photo in a drawer I rarely opened, the one where I kept Charles's last birthday card and the silver locket my grandmother gave me before she passed. I didn't cry. I didn't crumble. But I did sit on the edge of the bed for a long while and let myself feel something I hadn't allowed in months. Sadness. Not for what had happened. That pain had passed through me like a storm already. This was sadness for what wouldn't happen. Birthday calls, shared holidays, the sound of Lena's laughter in the hallway as she teased her own children. That door hadn't just closed. It had been sealed. Still, I knew one thing for certain. I didn't need that door to reopen. Because healing doesn't require reunion. It only requires release. The next day, the Then Trust held its first board meeting. We gathered in a quiet conference room at the local library. 6 women, all over 60, all survivors. We voted on the next wave of emergency grants and discussed outreach efforts for senior centers in 3 counties. Then someone suggested we start a speaker series. Women telling their stories, not to relive them, but to reclaim them. I didn't speak first, but when it was my turn, I stood. I thought survival was the finish line. I said, but it's not. The real milestone is when you stop looking over your shoulder, when you stop asking what if they try again, and instead say, let them, because now you know how to stand. The room was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt full of breath, of knowing, of women who had found each other in the silence the world once demanded they keep. Later that week, I received one more update from Victor. The federal investigation had expanded. Lena's name was now listed as party of interest, not a charge, but not nothing. And tucked into the last page of the report was something unexpected. A redacted IRS filing from 3 months earlier. A whistleblower alert that initiated the audit which led to Darren's charges. The tip had come from Lena. She had turned him in. Quietly. Privately. Before she wrote that note. Before the photo. I sat with that truth for a long time. It didn't undo what she had done, but it told me something else. She had broken the silence too. Maybe not for me, but maybe finally for herself. It was mid-July when I returned to the courthouse, not as a defendant or a petitioner, but as a witness. Victor had called 2 days earlier. The U.S. Attorney's Office is formalizing the case, he said. They'll want your official testimony on record. I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask why or how. I just said, tell me when. The courtroom this time felt different. Colder, quieter. The usual background noise of law clerks and security guards had a more clinical rhythm to it, like gears shifting in a machine that no longer needed to pretend it cared. I took the stand, swore my oath, and for the next 40 minutes I told the story, start to finish. Not with emotion, not with drama, just truth. I spoke of the first receipt left on the counter, the notebook Darren tried to hide, the refinance papers with my name forged in ink. I spoke of the moment I found my bedroom ransacked, the flash drive gone, the quiet, suffocating shift in the house. And then I told them about what I did next, how I'd called Victor, how I had planned for this possibility years before, how I had locked down everything they tried to take, how I had walked away, not as a victim but as a woman who refused to be erased. I watched the young prosecutor nod slowly as I spoke, and I noticed, behind him, one of the women from Adult Protective Services leaning forward, listening so intently it made my voice falter for a second. Not from fear, from recognition. After it was done, I stepped off the stand, gathered my coat and walked past Darren without a glance. He didn't look at me either. Outside, the sky had turned overcast. A soft wind moved through the trees lining the courthouse step. Patrice met me at the bottom of the stairs. How do you feel? She asked. I thought for a moment. I feel like I never needed a courtroom to prove anything. I said, but I'm glad the truth finally lives somewhere official. She smiled. You know what you should do next? I raised an eyebrow. Don't say yoga. No, she chuckled. You should go plant something. So I did. That weekend I went back to my small condo, one I had quietly purchased in Havenfield under my own name weeks after leaving Lena's house. It wasn't large, but it had southern-facing windows and a little strip of soil beneath the back fence. I bought 3 trays of pansies, purple and white, hardy flowers, the kind that come back even after a frost. As I dug my fingers into the earth, I thought of Charles, how he used to tease me for talking to plants, how he'd sneak out early in the mornings to pull weeds before I woke up. Can't have the neighbors thinking your flowers raise themselves, he once said. I smiled at the memory. I wasn't planting for Lena, or Darren, or even to mark some symbolic ending. I was planting because I had space now, in my home, in my head, in my life. Space that used to be filled with fear and strategy and grief. Now it was filled with basil and coffee mugs and quiet mornings without locked bedroom doors. That evening, I sat on the porch with a warm cup of lemon tea and watched the sun soften into gold across the backyard. No footsteps, no accusations, no staged politeness, just stillness. And for the first time in months, I felt something new, not just peace, pride. I had not only survived, I had rebuilt. The last piece of the past arrived folded neatly in another envelope. No return address again. But this time, the handwriting wasn't Lena's. It was printed, careful, deliberate, probably written by a paralegal or assistant. Inside was a formal letter from Darren's attorney. The tone was sterile, almost mechanical. Mr. Whitmore acknowledges past tensions within the family, and expresses a willingness to resolve any outstanding emotional or legal grievances in a private setting. He wishes for an opportunity to speak directly and informally, outside of court channels should you find that acceptable. At the bottom was a suggested date, a time, a location, and a line that read, "Mutual peace begins with dialogue." I folded the paper slowly and slid it back into the envelope. Then I placed it in a drawer under a box of unused batteries and forgot about it. Mutual peace. There was no mutual in manipulation. No shared fault in what they'd done. Only shared blood, and that wasn't enough anymore. I didn't tell Victor. I didn't need to. Because the answer was already living in the walls of the life I'd rebuilt. That same week, the Elladyne Trust funded its 4th round of emergency grants. 30 women received assistance, some to hire lawyers, others for basic living needs after being cut off by family members. One wrote us a thank you letter on the back of a grocery list. Another sent a Polaroid of her cat next to her newly reissued bank card. It made me laugh. These weren't dramatic endings. They were new beginnings. Small ones. Real ones. The same kind I had once thought were behind me. Then came the request I never expected. A university in the next county was organizing a symposium on financial abuse and elder rights. Someone from the Women's Center had submitted my name. They wanted me to open the event. I hesitated. Public speaking was never my comfort zone. I had taught history, led workshops, sure, but standing in front of strangers and unraveling my private scars, I wasn't sure I had it in me. But that night, while brushing my teeth, I looked at my reflection and saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. A woman who wasn't surviving anymore. She was choosing. So I said yes. On the day of the event, I wore a plain gray blazer, soft slacks, and the necklace Charles had given me on our 25th anniversary, not for sentiment, but because it made me feel solid. The auditorium wasn't huge, maybe 50 people, mostly women. A few men, a few students scribbling into notebooks. When I stepped to the podium, I didn't read from anything. I just told the story again, but not in the same way. This time I didn't start with the betrayal. I started with the voice. How easily it's stolen. How quickly it can vanish when someone we love tells us we're wrong, or tired, or confused. How simple it is to forget that we're still the authors of our own lives. And then I ended with something I hadn't written down anyway. I looked across the quiet rows of seats and said, "They took my trust, yes, but not just the one tied to money. They tried to take the kind of trust that lives inside your own skin. The belief that your gut still matters, that your boundaries deserve respect, that your no means no." But I got it back. All of it. Afterward, a woman in the back approached me, late 50s. Denim jacket, nervous smile. "My mother's been through something similar," she whispered. I didn't know what to do, but now I think maybe I do. I handed her a card. Not mine. The center's. She gripped it like a rope. That evening, I returned home to my condo. My pansies were blooming. Patrice had stopped by while I was gone and left a pie cooling on the counter. Cherry. My favorite. I lit a candle, poured myself a cup of tea, and sat at my desk with a fresh page in my journal. I didn't write about Lena, or Darren, or the court. I wrote about the day I planted basil and didn't think about what might get taken from me next. I wrote about silence, how it used to be something done to me. Now it was something I chose, not because I was afraid, but because I no longer needed noise to prove I had survived. 3 days after the symposium, I received a voicemail from Lena. Her voice was quieter than I remembered. Not broken, just smaller. "Mum," she began, pausing too long between the words. "I know you probably won't answer. I wouldn't either. But I just wanted to say, I saw the recording. I've seen all of it now. I know it's too late for sorry, and I'm not calling to make excuses." There was a breath. "Darren's gone. Moved out last week. He left a note, of course he did. Just like he handled everything else. But I'm not calling about him. I'm calling because I think I understand now. What I let happen. What I was part of." She didn't cry. She didn't beg. I hope one day you'll let me sit beside you in silence, even if we don't talk, even if you never call me your daughter again." The line went quiet, then disconnected. I didn't return the call. Not out of anger, out of something deeper, finality. Because closure, I've learned, isn't always a conversation. Sometimes, it's a decision made in peace. I opened my back porch door and stepped into the early evening. The breeze smelled like honeysuckle. I carried a small box with me. Nothing fancy. Inside were a few old photos I had kept in a drawer too long. Ones of Lena, as a baby, her first day of school, our road trip to Montrenia when she was 11. I didn't burn them. I didn't frame them either. I simply buried them, under the deep in the soil. Not as punishment, as release. Later that night, I emailed Victor and asked for the final documentation. The court had ruled. The federal charges had moved forward. The Elladyne Trust was fully transitioned to an independent foundation, with a board of directors and a grant committee. It didn't need my hand anymore, and that was the most freeing feeling of all. 2 days later, I received a package from the Department of Justice, copies of my testimony, transcripts of Darren's indictment, and a small formal note acknowledging my role in the investigation. No medals, no drama, just paper, just proof. I placed it in the filing cabinet under H for Holloway. Then I closed the drawer. For good. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, boiled water for tea, opened the window to let in the soft sounds of early birds and distant traffic. I looked around the small warm space I now called home, and felt something in my chest shift once more. Not grief, not anger, gratitude, not for what had happened, but for what had survived it, me. It was a Thursday afternoon when I received the last piece of it all. A final letter from the court confirming the dissolution of the fraudulent trust Darren had set up in my name. The $3 million that had nearly been rerouted, quietly, cruelly, was now protected under the legal shield of the Elladyne Foundation. Irrevocable, untouchable, free from the hands that once reached for it. Victor had written a small note in the margin. Closure doesn't always look like a gavel. Sometimes it looks like a signature under your own name. I folded the letter and placed it in my journal, not the filing cabinet, not the desk drawer. This time it belonged in something personal, something I'd carry forward. That evening I sat on the back steps of my little condo, wrapped in my navy shawl as the summer sun dipped low. The pansies in the garden had survived a recent heat wave. Their colors were vibrant now, more resilient, somehow, than when I first planted them. I thought about Lena, not with pain, not with longing, just stillness. She had sent no more letters, made no more calls, and that silence wasn't empty anymore. It was respectful. It was hers. I had spent a long time wondering if we would ever speak again, if forgiveness was something I owed. But the truth I'd come to understand was this: not every wound heals into a relationship. Some just heal, and that's enough. Across town, the Elladyne Foundation was preparing for its first statewide awareness campaign. Patrice was helping lead the effort. Billboards, online videos, interviews with local leaders. They had asked if I wanted to be part of the launch. I declined, not because I was hiding, but because my part was done. I had spoken. I had warned. I had given the quietest parts of myself a name and a story and a platform. Now it was someone else's turn to speak. The last time I saw Darren was on a news broadcast I didn't mean to watch. A local reporter covered the sentence. He sat stiffly behind his lawyer, eyes flat, hands folded like someone playing the role of remorse. He received a 6-year sentence for wire fraud, attempted elder exploitation, and document forgery. There were no tears, just the sound of a door closing behind him. I turned off the TV before the segment ended, not because I couldn't bear it, but because I didn't need it anymore. Later that week, I cleared out the final moving boxes from the guest room. I turned it into a small reading space, just a single chair, a side table, and a lamp. The walls stayed bare, except for one small framed photo, A picture of my grandmother Eladine standing in front of her garden with dirt on her hands and a grin across her face. She never spoke loudly, but people listened. The story I lived through isn't rare. That's what surprises people the most. It happens quietly, inside homes with good lawns, over dinner tables, behind polite smiles and phrases like just helping. But now, the silence is cracking. And sometimes the loudest kind of justice is the kind that never even raises its voice. If you've read this far, if you've ever felt your worth slip through the hands of someone who should have protected it, I hope you know this. You can take it back, even if it starts with something as small as changing a password or planting flowers in your own name. I used to think I had lost everything, but what I really did was rediscover the one thing they couldn't take: myself.